This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, is everyone? Yeah, great. Fine. So let me start telling what is the agenda that we have for today. Okay, so even before we get started today with, let's say, creating a virtual machine using an ARM template, one of the most important thing that we have to again, revisit is the architecture of a virtual machine so that we can, create ARM templates with ease and etc. So we had a virtual network, we had a subnet inside that virtual network, and we have a NIC card which gets attached to the subnet, and we have a virtual machine which gets attached to the NIC card. And you have your public IPs, your private IPs, everything getting attached to, let's say, the NIC card out here. And you have something known as a network security group rule, which basically, controls what kind of a traffic that you want to get inside your virtual machine, what kind of a traffic basically that goes outside your virtual machine, and etc. These were all the essential components that we, went ahead and, we created things out. Now, until now, we have been doing it, let's say, using the Azure portal. But what do we want to do right now is that we want to use our skill on ARM templates or PowerShell scripting to go ahead and, let's say, script this out, to go ahead and, let's say, automate it out. So what do I do right now is that firstly, let me go ahead and, let's say, I think I've like deleted this particular virtual machine, but just in case I deleted this out. Now, let me go ahead and create something. I'll just say create a new virtual machine. Now, I am someone who's just looking for a clue how to, start off with, let's say, the ARM templates and etc. I am absolutely, I don't know what, what components go into it and all that stuff. So I'll say, okay, fine. Let's take a default resource group. Let's take a default name and let's say ECS2. Let's say it's 2019 data center, same size is okay, which is good enough. Let's give a username and password for this. I need RDP, HTTP, and HTTPS to be open. And disks, I need just a OS disk out here. Networking, good enough. Whichever network is okay for me, I'll go ahead and take that out. Advanced, review, and create. So all I'm doing is just making sure to do a review and create out here, but I won't create it. I'll say, okay, fine. As and when I reach out to the screen, I'll go ahead and click on an option called download template for automation. Instead of reviewing and creating this out, I will now say, okay, fine, this is something that I need to use for automation. So I'll say download this template for automation. And what's Azure going to do is that Azure is going to generate a template for me saying that, hey, you know what, this is the ARM template, what you'll need to look at, or this is the ARM template, how you'll need to draft your, entire virtual machine and all that stuff. So I'll just take this out. Let's go into, let's say, my VS Code. Let's say new file, select the language called ARM. And as in when you place it out here, you have an entire script out. And if I just look at the outline of it, this is actually going to create all these resources for me. A virtual machine, network security group rule, network interface, virtual network, and all these stuff. This is okay, good, not enough, not a problem. Meaning you can now take this entire thing and you can now change your couple of values out here, and then you can start creating your own templates. Like you can automate it, you can do a lot of automation with this, but I prefer drafting my own templates because that enables me a lot of additional capability to go ahead and, let's say, do a lot of stuff. But why did I do this? Because I need to get an idea about what I'm getting into. Like, okay, fine, this is how I need to draft my script, or this is how basically I need to start, or this is the direction in which I need to head. So this is how I would do basically in order to start with. Also, very importantly, I would do the ARM template documentations. I'll just go into the ARM template documentation. I'll go into the references. I'll go into template references out here. Here, if I just select a virtual machine, it will give me, hey, you know what, this is a resource called virtual machine. These are all, or basically, this is, let's say, a boilerplate template is what I call. Is like this is all the parameters that we need. This is there are a couple of mandatory parameters, there are a couple of not mandatory parameters and all that stuff. So this is basically the documentation what I'll be referring to very frequently on how to basically create and all that stuff. So with this, let's get started. Or this is, let's say, the bicep, but I need a JSON. This is how it look like. It says type and all that stuff. And I'll just click on JSON, and this is how the entire template actually looks for me. Like this is the reference for me to go ahead and start creating something out there. It says fine, not a problem. Great. Now, how do I create it using the VS Code? How do I create my own templates using the VS Code? I'll say okay, fine, new. Again, select the language called ARM. I can close this out, or you can keep it open for your reference. And just type in ARM forward slash. I mean, just type in ARM hyphen, enter. You'll get a very basic template. I don't need the functions, I don't need the outputs. I am okay with it. So let me get rid of it. And let me now just start by saying it is a VM. As and when I typed in VM, it's giving me a couple of options like, you know what? Do you want a Windows VM? Do you want a Linux VM? What do you exactly want? I'll say, you know what? I need a Windows virtual machine. Click on enter. That's it. You have a template which is ready. You have a template which is like pretty much ready to go ahead and, let's say, give you a complete virtual machine architecture. And if I look at the outline of my template, I have a couple of resources that are getting created out here. One, my storage account. Why is it my storage account? Because for diagnostic purposes, they have, like, went ahead and, let's say, are creating a storage account. But to make it easy, I'll go ahead and delete this out. I don't need this out. So I don't need a storage account out here to create, let's say, a virtual machine. So I've taken my storage account out. Very importantly, I have the schema parameters and everything, which is like by default given out to me basically by the template. So I'm not focusing on them for now. Public IP address, network security group rules, virtual network, network interface card, and finally my virtual machine. So let's inspect each and every resource, and let's see if I can parameterize something. I can basically change something into, I mean, this is all hard coded right now. So can I parameterize something out here is something that I'll try to see out here. Okay. So the first thing, public IP. Public IP is an individual resource, guys. I can directly go to the portal and create it independently without any dependencies. That's the reason this was the first resource that Microsoft is kind of creating out there for me in the template. Saying, okay, fine, this is the name of your public IP. Now I don't want this to be like this. I want to parameterize my name. I'll say a new parameter. I'll say public IP name. I'll say it is a string. I'll give a default value for it. Test public IP. Just to make sure it is unique. 001. I'll say, okay, fine, this is the public IP. Now, I don't want to basically use this public IP. I mean, I don't want to hard code my name out here. Rather, I will refer to the parameters and I will say it is a public IP name. So the first thing I'm doing out here in this particular resource is I'm changing the name of the public IP out here. And I'm changing the name of my public IP out here. And I'm saying instead of getting hard coded, refer from the parameters. Secondly, the type is by default given to me by Microsoft. Uh, okay, just a second. Okay. Secondly, the type out here, which is given by Microsoft, it says Microsoft.network forward slash public IP addresses out here. An indicator that I am going ahead and creating a public IP out here. So it's saying, okay, fine, please go ahead and create a public IP. This is how it, kind of it needs to get, or this is how it needs to get assigned. Great. API version by default given by Microsoft. Location, I can hard code a location out here, or I can say, you know what, it's a function which says, you know what, in whichever resource group you are deploying this particular virtual machine or this particular template in, go ahead into that particular resource group and get the location of that particular resource group. I'm okay with it. Great. Tags, very simple. Public IP, it's like, for identification purpose. So I'm just tagging something out here. So I can say it is my public IP. And public IP again, static or dynamic, two things, right? So I'll say it is a dynamic, and it's saying what is the domain name label or the DNS name label. Like yesterday we were looking at a DNS name label, right? So it's saying, okay, fine. What is your DNS name label? For now, I'll just take it as Windows VM1 because that's what I want to create. And you have something called tool over, right? It's a function which will convert all these digits into lower cases. Because normally, sometimes Azure might not accept higher casing because of the naming convention, etc. It follows. So it's just using a function which is called tool over. This was the first resource that I'm actually going ahead and creating, which is my public IP address, where I defined a name, parameterize that name, I define the type, which is like Microsoft.network/public IP addresses. I defined the location and I said, you know what, location is also not static, it's dynamic parameter. Go ahead and let's say refer that location to, something like, go ahead into the resource group and pull out the location wherever it is getting deployed. Secondly, another resource that can really stay independent of anything is a network security group rule. It says, okay, fine. This is how the group rule basically looks like. And do you want to give a name to it? It by default took a Windows VM1-NSG. We can also go ahead and parameterize this. You can say it is parameters, NSG name, and it's throwing an error because you do not have we haven't defined this parameter out here. So I'll say give me a new parameter called NSG name, string, default value is, I'll say, my default NSG. I've given it and this name is done. Secondly, you have to observe the type. It is again Microsoft.network, same thing like the public IP addresses, but it's a network security group rule. Very, very important, guys. And this is something that by default the templates will, the template is going to give you. You do not have to change anything to it. Location, I've done the same thing. Now, very importantly, security rules being an array, meaning you do not have to declare one rule. You can declare many rules out here. And the first rule is what? It's an RDP port open. Access is allowed. Direction is inbound, meaning you're defining an inbound port rule for RDP to allow the RDP connection. So I'll say it is RDP allow. The name is RDP underscore allow. And I want to create this as a web server. So I also want to basically, make sure to open my port 80. So how do I do it? Same thing. I'll just copy everything out here. Put a comma here. I'll say this is not RDP allow now. This is HTTP allow. Port number is 80. Direction is inbound. Priority is not 100, now 200, because no two rules can have the same priority. So if you basically give a same priority, then it'll basically throw an error out here. Do you want a third rule for HTTPS? Sure, you can go ahead and get the same thing. Same thing, but this is HTTPS allow. Port is 443. Priority is 300 or 210, whatever it is, it's okay for me. Direction is inbound and allow. Meaning you can define multiple rules out here, both inbound and outbound, inside the same network security group rules, because network security group rules as such, the security rules as such, is an array of rules, or it's a collection of rules. It's not a string. How is it not a string? Because here the security rules basically is being defined under the square bracket, which is telling that you know what, this is a collection, this is an array of rules out here. So I can go ahead and create this out, which is great. Now I've defined two different resources which are independent of each other, which can just get created without any dependencies. But when I am creating a virtual network, what I want to do is that I want to attach this particular virtual network or the subnet to, let's say, the network interface card. And also, very importantly, I want to attach my network security group rules to the subnet. Because again, going back to our architecture, this is how it is, right? I took my network security group rule. I basically created a network security group rule resource, and I'm attaching it to the subnet so that every virtual machine in the same subnet will kind of follow my own rule or follow basically the same network security group rule inbound and outbound. So here, when I'm creating a virtual network out here, this is the entire resource block which is creating a virtual network and a subnet inside it. So what am I going to do here is that I'm going to say this is not again a static parameter. This is something that I want to parameterize. I'll say this is parameters vnet name. We'll just pass a parameter like this, and I'll define a parameter called vnet name out here. So I'll say it is vnet name string default value is vnet test, something like this. And coming down to my resource again, this is not throwing an error. Type again is Microsoft.network / virtual networks. API version, no, don't take it. I mean, not required. Location, resource group dot location. Now, very importantly, this is not an independent resource. This is a resource which is again dependent upon a network security group rule object that I am creating above. Because I want to attach my network security group to my virtual network. And how am I attaching it? Over here in line number 120, I'm saying, you know what, attach the subnet to the network security group. Now, in order to make sure that this entire template is like kind of successful and the resource creation is the way I expect it, meaning I first want a public IP or a network security group rule, anything is okay. Only after the network security, but very importantly, only after the network security group rule is created, please go ahead and create a virtual network. Why do I need this? Because I'm attaching my network security group rule to my virtual network out here. So without a network security group rule, this will kind of fail. That is the reason I'm introducing a condition called depends on. I'm saying, you know what, the creation of the virtual network, the creation of this entire VNet should depend upon the resource ID of what? The network security group rule. Resource ID again is a function which will go ahead and grab the resource ID of a particular object that you are creating in your template. So how do I do it? Now I have changed a lot of things, right? So to make sure that I'm properly following things out, I'll say it is resource ID of what. Now it's giving you, you know what, yeah, you have a lot of resources that is created. What do you want to make this dependent upon? I'll say it is network security group rules, comma, parameter NSG name, because I am parameterizing my network security group rule name and all that stuff. So even the resource ID will kind of change. So I am giving a new resource ID which will say, hey, you know what, please go ahead and get the resource ID of that particular network security group rule that I'm creating above, and also refer to the parameter of the network security group rule name. This is called resource chaining. I am chaining one resource to the other, and this is very important, guys, and this can only, you'll only get a clarity once you have an understanding of the architecture of the virtual machine. And that's the reason I'm focusing and emphasizing basically on, let's say, the entire architecture of the virtual network and the virtual machine that is sitting inside it, which is good. Display name, again, tags, like not a mandatory parameter. You can, if you want, you can just delete the entire block, which is okay with me. Properties, it's saying address space, very important. It's here is where you can go ahead and declare an address space out here, telling that, what, my address space is this, and here is where you can go ahead and declare your subnets. Here I have hard coded the name of a subnet. I can also pass it as subnet1, and I'm saying this is 10.0.0.0/24. Can you create another subnet out here? Definitely yes, you can create another subnet out here. How can you create it? This is again an array. I can just put another block out here, and I can pass in the name of the subnet out here. That's it. A very simple, like it's like very simple copy and paste. And I just need to change the address prefix that I'm creating out here. So for simplicity, I'm not creating another subnet out here. I'm just creating one subnet which is getting attached to that particular network security group rule. Which is great, good, not a problem, good enough. And here also the resource ID, right? It should change. It should be the same thing like this. So I'll take it and I'll say this is the resource ID of the network security group. So I'm carefully analyzing each and every resource and I'm seeing how they are getting created and all that stuff. This is the creation of a virtual network and a subnet inside that virtual network. And if you look at this, right, it's saying one child resource, which is a subnet one. And here, if you see, it is one parent resource, meaning the subnet is now getting created as a child to the virtual network. And I'm only creating one subnet out here with this particular address space, which will give me 256 IP addresses basically, out of which 251 are usable. So this is the block from line number 96 to line number 125, which is going ahead and creating a virtual network for me. Now, the resource that I'm focused upon is a network interface card, and my network interface card will always depend upon, or my network interface card will need two things: one, a public IP, two, a private IP. Public IP can or cannot, I mean, I can declare a public IP, cannot declare a public IP, not a problem, but I will definitely need a private IP, and the private IP is nothing but a IP that is allocated from the subnet, right? Like this is how it is getting allocated. I have a subnet and one of the IP from the subnet is getting allocated to the network interface card. So I'm saying this is okay, fine. I'll change this, let's say, to, again, I'll parameterize this. So I'm parameterizing all my names to make sure that it is very simple for me. So I'll say it is Nick card name, and I will basically give a Nick card name out here. I'll say this is fine. This is a default value out here. And the default value is something like test NIC card 001, comma. Okay, I think I put a different name out here. So let me come down and let me correct that out. Yes. And the error is gone. So I just put an extra C out here. So I just take that off. Type network interfaces. Location again is something like this. Depending upon virtual networks and the public IP, both of the resources basically out here. So I'll say it is a resource ID of what? The public IP addresses, public IP, and also the resource ID of the virtual network. Of, let's say, the virtual networks out here, comma, VNet name. This is how I'm passing it. Tags, not mandatory, like very optional. Here, properties is something which is very important, especially for a network interface card. It's saying, okay, fine, this is the configuration one. Private IP allocation is dynamic. You can also have it as a static. And now it's saying, you know what? this is how I'm going ahead and declaring my public IP and my private IP addresses so that it can get attached to my network interface card. Both of them, how am I declaring it? For public IP address, I'm saying, okay, fine, this is the resource ID of this particular public IP, but this doesn't exist. So I'll say it is the resource ID of Microsoft, which I mean Microsoft something like this, but public IP addresses, comma, name of the public IP. And look at here, it's depending upon the resource ID of the subnet under which you're creating this particular network interface card. So I'm saying, okay, fine, this subnet also kind of changed. So I'll say this is the resource ID of virtual network subnets, parameters vnet name, comma, subnet 1. Because now my subnet is not called something like what the template has given me. I am taking it as a subnet 1 out here. This was my NIC card resource, guys. Starting at line number 133 and ending at line number 161, the entire block of code is defining how do I create my NIC card. Finally is where I go ahead and create my virtual machine. So I'll parameterize this to, I'll say parameter VM name and declare a parameter here. New parameter, I'll say VM name, and I'll give a default value. I'll pass a default value for it. I'll say it is VM1. And coming down, I need to change, or basically I need to take a couple of resources out here. I need to basically edit a couple of resources, do a couple of things out here. Now it's saying, you know what, it's depending upon the storage account, but I don't want, I basically deleted the storage account. The first thing that I did, I deleted the storage account. So I don't need this particular dependency. Second thing, it definitely depends upon the network interface card that I'm creating, because that's how it will get attached to it, right? And the network interface card name was also kind of different for me because this is not the name what I'm creating. Rather, I'm taking a different name out here. So I'll just take this out and give my own thing, resource ID of network interfaces, comma, parameter NIC card name. Tags, not mandatory. I can say it's a Windows Server, Win Server 2019. Now, very importantly, the size. All of these things are getting declared in something known as properties. I want a Windows Server with, let's say, a computer name, something like, not this, but I have a computer name. I have something called parameters VM name. I'm giving a parameter out here. Administrator username is test user. Administrator password is Microsoft-001. Now it's saying, okay, fine. What is something that you want out here? I'll say yes, it's an image reference. It's a Microsoft Windows image, but it's not a 2012 data center. It's rather a 2019-data center. This is the image that what I want really. Because if you look at this, right, the image is something like this. The SKU offering is something like 2019 data center. Version is latest. So this was the one that, when I was creating, I just took this out. So this is, let's say, the image reference that I'm referring out to. And now it's saying, okay, fine. What is the name of the OS disk? It's now by default giving me something like Windows VM OS disk and etc. Can I create a data disk here? Yes, you can definitely go ahead and create a data disk out here. You can give a comma and you can say data disks, and you can basically give the name of the data disk basically that you want to go ahead and create it, or the properties of the data disk that you want to go ahead and create it. But for simplicity, I'm not, right now going ahead and creating a data disk out here. Let's do a control Z. Fine. So I'm just creating an OS disk, and by default, OS disk gives me somewhere around 128 GB of memory. But if I want to change that, I can also basically give a parameter called size, disk size in GB. I can declare a parameter called disk size in GB, and I can give a parameter out here. But I'm taking the default out here so that it's a 128 GB memory. And very importantly, this gets dependent upon the network interface. Like this network profile is something which defines how your virtual machine gets attached to your network interface card. And my network interface card was something different. So it's resource ID, network interfaces, NIC card name. This is how my network interface resource ID is getting pulled. And finally, out here, you have something known as a diagnostic profile. This is completely for a diagnosis, meaning the logs that are generated from the virtual machine will get saved inside a particular storage account. But I did not want the diagnostic profile, meaning when you switch on boot diagnostics, right? It will basically ask you for a storage account to store all the diagnostic logs. So I said I don't need a boot diagnostic. I don't need this diagnostic profile at all. So I'll say this is false, and I can say I can take the entire storage URI out here, meaning I don't need a diagnostic profile at all. I don't want this at all, and I am done with my entire template. So what all am I creating again out here? All the essentials. I am firstly creating a public IP which is independent of any resource, a network security group independent of any resource, a virtual network that is like going to go ahead and let's say a virtual network basically that is going to go ahead and let's say get dependent upon my network security group rules because I want to attach the NSG basically to the subnet basically that I'm creating. A network interface card which needs both a public IP and a private IP. So I am making sure this particular network interface card is getting dependent upon the public IP addresses and the virtual network also. And this is how I'm declaring my public IP and my private IP out here. And finally, the Windows Server 2019. This is the resource that I'm creating in the last and attaching my OS disk, attaching the network interfaces, attaching everything basically that I have created above. Now this is what it takes to go ahead and create a template, guys. Then isn't it not easy to go ahead and just let's say create something on the portal? Yes, it is easy. But if you have a boilerplate template, meaning this is my template out here. If you have one template out here, you can go ahead and reuse this. That's the very reason I parameterized all these names. And if you want to reuse something, you just need to override these parameters and you'll get a new set of infrastructure like a network interface, like a virtual network and etc. That is getting created in the next iteration if you just go ahead and deploy this out the second time. But how do I deploy this out? So firstly, I'll say, okay, fine, save. And it'll ask me a location to save. I'll say, okay, fine, this is the H drive where I've been practicing all these things out. So I'll say this is VM creation hyphen test and it's a JSON file. So I'll say it's a JSON. I'll say save. So VM creation test and shows me no errors. So what I want to do right now is that I want to use my Azure account to go ahead and deploy this out. So I have my Azure account open. So I'll say, okay, fine. Give me a new resource group. Give me a new resource group and I'll say this is VM1-resource or VM1RG, something like this. I'll say create this out and I'm creating it in East US. So all my resources, I expect all my resources to get created on East US guys because I am establishing all the dependencies out there. So now I'll say new, select a language PowerShell. And I'll say it is new hyphen AZ resource group deployment. This is the command basically that I'll use to go ahead and deploy my ARM templates. I'll say name VM deployment. I'll say resource group name that I just created right now, which is VM1-RG. Mode and all, I don't need this. I just need a template file, and which is a VM creation.json.test.json, and I can run it in something called as a debug mode in order to see what is getting deployed, how is it getting deployed, and all that stuff. I can say function F8. I'll say yes. And even before this, I kind of logged into my portal. So it says fine error. The VM deployment is not valid according to this one. See internal address tracking ID. Okay, fine. Okay, so it says the domain name label is invalid. The name itself is a part of something like this. It says the domain name label basically that you're giving out, right? That is not a valid one. So please go ahead and change that out. The domain name label basically what we have given out here. It's kind of, let's say, it's basically something that is not accepting out here. So it's saying, okay, fine. You know what? This particular deployment cannot go through. So I'll say, okay, fine, suspend. I'll go into my template, and public IP address is where we went ahead and let's say declared the domain name label. So I'll say this is not Windows VM1 out here, rather parameters, uh, or I'll just give a new name basically, it's called domain name or name label. I'll basically take a new parameter out here, name label, default value is something like, okay, so this expects something like some dot something like this, right? So fine, so I'll say it's just 2 2 z0 dot something like this, so independent of my VM name and all that stuff. So let me try doing a deployment right now again. Let's see if this accepts it. Now the template is getting valid. It says, you know what, yeah, the template is valid and all that stuff. I'll say yes to all. And now your deployment will actually start here. And you can now track your deployments out here. Go into the resource group, the deployment sections of the resource group. I will do keep doing a couple of refreshes out here. It created a network security group rule to start with. Now it's trying to go ahead and create the public IP. It went ahead and create the public IP also. And now it start creating the virtual network and attach the network security group rule to the virtual network out there. Then finally the NIC card, and then finally the virtual machine. This is how it's going ahead and doing my entire deployment as such. Guys, one very important thing to note about here is that this deployment is running in an incremental mode. Meaning if I take my template and deploy it back again, it won't destroy anything. It will just create what is not there. These are called incremental deployments. There is also something known as a complete deployment mode that an ARM template can run on. Complete deployment mode will destroy everything and recreate stuff that is there in the ARM template. Meaning, let's say if I take a new template, I only create a storage account in it called storage one, and I deploy it in a complete deployment mode. It will go ahead, erase everything in my resource group firstly, and then make a deployment for the storage account. And complete deployment modes are always destructive. Highly advised not to use them. Like even Microsoft tells that, hey, you know what, you're using a complete deployment. Are you sure that you want to do it? Because this will kind of destroy everything that you kind of created. So complete deployment mode is definitely not advisable. Like it's only in situations where we want to go ahead and let's say clean up all the resources. We said, you know what, the resources all needs to be cleaned up and all that stuff. That's when you'll go ahead and use something known as a complete deployment mode out there. Right now, I have approached it using an incremental deployment, guys. Guys, any questions with this? Anything basically with the entire template? Any part that you kind of did not follow? Anything basically?
How do we know that that is incremental or complete deployment in the template?
By default, it's going to run on an incremental mode until and unless you specify it's a complete mode. If you explicitly specify that the mode is complete, you can basically pass in a parameter basically out here. Now, since this is running, it's not giving me the parameter out here, but after the run is complete, I'll also show you how you can pass it to run on a complete mode. By default, it goes and runs in a incremental mode only. Now it went ahead
Okay.
and created all my resources out here, and now it says, you know what, the mode is incremental out here. Now, if you want to go ahead and pass it, or if you want to go ahead and run it in a mode called like let's say complete, you can pass a complete out here in this way. By default, it runs in an incremental mode, guys. And now it went ahead and created, a whole bunch of resources out here with the domain name, label, and everything. Like whatever I passed, it went ahead and created all these resources. So you have a VM1, a working VM, and all these things, and you have the rules also basically for this particular VM. And the rules is what we defined: 100, 200, 210. HTTPS, HTTP, and RDP allow. And I can right away go ahead and do an RDP into this machine. But is there an IIS installed on top of this machine? Certainly not. I have not installed something known as an IIS on top of it. So no matter what you do, you cannot go ahead and get things out. So how do you again install an IIS? You can do a run command, you can do a custom script extension. But can you install an IIS using the same template that I kind of approached? Definitely yes. That is the power of automation. You do not even have to come to the portal. You can directly use the ARM template and you can basically deploy the IIS on top of the server without even having to do anything. So how do we do it? We'll discuss that in a minute. But before that, guys, any questions with this particular template deployment? Anything that you haven't followed anywhere?
So in a real case scenario, we use
Hmm.
existing virtual network and existing subnets. We don't create every
Depends.
time for.
It depends upon what you're doing rather. If you're creating once, if you're, I mean, you'll have to at least create once, right? So you'll have to at least write a template once. So you'll write a template, keep it. If you deploy it the next time, it's not going to do anything.
Okay, can we
You
use
keep
existing virtual networks and subnets? So
Yes, you can use existing virtual networks and subnets. For that, you need to make a call. You need to reference. You do not have to now create virtual networks and subnets here. You'll have to rather refer it while your template is getting deployed. If you have a virtual
uh,
network that is existing,
okay, that's come under depends on
that
that.
will not come under depends upon. So the thing is that you won't create the entire resource at all. You won't create this particular resource. You won't create the entire resource at all out here. Rather, what you'll do here is that you'll say get the resource ID and you won't even mention a depends on out here, because if you're mentioning a depends on, your template will now fail because it says what, you're not creating the virtual network out here, so I cannot depend upon this. Rather, when you're defining the resource ID is where you'll just give the name of the virtual network. Like right now I'm just passing the name of the virtual network, so you'll have the same parameter. And if your virtual network is sitting in a different resource group, you can also give a resource group name out here, something like this: parameters resource group name. If let's say your virtual network is sitting in a different resource group and you're not creating a virtual network using this particular template out, this is how you can make a call to the virtual network out there. So in real time, what really happens is that yes, we don't create resources again and again, but we at least need to create it once. You can use the same template to create it, or you can use a different template to create it out there. But you need to create it at least once, right? You need to have at least one template which will maintain the state of your infrastructure and which will help you reuse the same thing. Just in case something got deleted, you can just take this template and deploy it out. But in case you're, let's say, deploying the virtual network using a different template, not this, and you want to make a reference to the virtual network, then you do not have to pass that virtual network here in the depends on parameter, because if you pass it, this template will expect that, hey, you know what, you're creating this virtual network in this particular template. But I'm not doing that. I'm referencing it out somewhere. So I'll just use that reference out here. Does it answer your question, Chandra?
Yes, but we need to practice that
Yeah, you
that
will
parameters.
definitely need a lot of practice out here. Like you'll definitely need a lot of practice, especially when it comes to automation. Like, I mean, no matter how many times I explain, it's only when you kind of, sit on this and, you kind of write this is when you'll understand the complexity of what this is. Guys, any questions with this particular template as such? So the only reason I'm not referencing things out is to, not make things complicated or make, I mean, the basic templates basically will have to be very, very basic. So I'm making sure that I stick to this one. So guys, any questions with this one? Anything? Okay, so then how do I then install IIS on top of it then using the same virtual, using the same ARM template? How do I, let's say, install something known as an extension out here? So for that, let's imagine that I don't know anything about it. I'll say IIS install ARM templates. The first link will say, you know what, this is a tutorial. Basically, you can go. All I would need is this link. All I need is just this particular link out here telling that how do you install IIS. Now, what they're doing out here is that the IIS, installation of IIS is happening through something known as a custom script extension. And this is another resource basically that I am creating, let's say, inside my template. And how are they installing it? They have a GitHub URL out here to basically start with a very simple thing. Have a GitHub URL out here, which has something known as a install web server.ps1. So if you click this, it's a public GitHub URL. It has install Windows features, name, web server, include management tools. Very simple one-line code. And what are we doing out here? So let's import this entire thing out into our template. So I'll just copy this out, copy the entire section out here. I'll go into our template. And after the creation of virtual machine, like my virtual machine is starting at 176 and ending at, let's say, 222. Put a comma here. Let's put a new resource out here. Now, do I need to do anything? Yes, I need to do a lot of basically editing out here. But right now I'll say, okay, fine. You know what? This is not variables because I do not define anything in my variable. I rather say this is parameters, VM name. The first thing. Secondly, I am not defining my location anywhere. Rather, I am saying it is resource group dot or resource group rather dot location. So I'm calling my function. And now I'm saying, you know what? This is dependent upon my virtual machine name. So this is, let's say, the resource ID of my virtual machine. So I can say it is a resource ID of my virtual network virtual machines parameters VM name. I can say this is the resource ID in this way. And here is where I'm going ahead and saying that, you know what, this is a Microsoft.compute and custom script extension. This is the URL in where my script is there. Go into that URL, catch that script and execute this command, meaning go into that virtual machine, invoke something known as PowerShell.exe and execute this particular file which is called iiswebinstall.ps1 in an unrestricted mode. This is what, or this is the entire thing I'm basically giving it out. And now my template basically became a bit clumsy because I basically copied and paste something out here. So I just click Control A, just format this out so that my template looks more appealing and more pleasing out here. And all I'm trying to do right now is that making sure that, you know, depends upon and just putting a parameter out here telling that the custom script extension should go in this way. Taking the same thing, I'll run it in a debug mode so that I'll track any errors if there are any. Now it's saying, okay, fine, you know what, I'm trying to create the action. Now it's saying, yes, this template is valid, which is great. And after the template validation is done, I can now check this particular deployment out here. It will basically go ahead and just say, do a deployment again, but this time it's not going to destroy anything. It's just going to check whether the resources are existing or not. It says, yes, this is existing, and yes, a lot of resources are existing. And now, since it's running in an incremental mode, it will just go ahead and create what is not existing. And in my case, it's a custom script extension to install IIS on top of it. So it's gonna just evaluate everything. It's gonna see whether every property is like the same way, like all are like, you know, it says now the service is like unavailable and all that stuff. It will basically see if, let's say, all my parameters are there, all my parameters are there in place, and it'll just go ahead and make a deployment out here. It says yes, it's like checking this out. It says okay, fine, this is there, and it says okay, fine, the nick card is also there. but the only thing that is not there is probably the extension. So if the user is given a proper input, I'll just go ahead and install the extension on top of it. Now it says, you know what, I am creating an extension right now on the virtual machine basically that got created, and this extension is just going to go ahead and install the IIS on top of it. So it's going to take like about 5 to 10 minutes of time to go ahead and let's say do this out, because this is an installation and it's calling an external URL. It's calling an external GitHub URL and it's installing things out. Now I did a public installation out here. I went ahead and declared my GitHub URL and all that stuff. I put in let's say a public URL. But let's say if your company needs something more private, you can also basically give the SAS token of the storage account. You can put let's say scripts inside your storage account and give a SAS token of the storage account, and also make sure to install the extensions whatever you need using this particular extension resource. So I just took the extension resource from Google. I said, you know what, I need to install something known as an IIS. So I just took this extension, I just put it in my template, changed very minimal, whatever I need I just changed it, and I am just executing this out. So while this deployment is going on, the custom script extension is going to call an external URL which is in GitHub. It's going to take this particular script called IIS web install, which just has a one line script telling that you know what, this is what it is, and I'll just go ahead and call the script, and it's going to invoke something called as a PowerShell exe that is by default present in any Windows server, and it will say okay fine, install something known as a web server, or basically install this particular file out there. This is how it's basically making a call to it, and this is going to take some time. Like this basically installation is going to take some time. It's basically checking all the deployment and etc. And once this deployment is done, it'll say okay fine, the status is good, great. And now if I look at my virtual machine, right, let me go into my virtual machine, let me go into the extensions here. I'll now have an extension that is coming in. This is right now getting installed, and installation of custom scripts are, they usually take a bit of time, so I'm not surprised there. So it'll take some time, and after that particular time interval, right, you'll also have an IIS installed on top of your virtual machine, and you have installed all these things using the ARM template. Like you're not doing anything manually. So the same thing that you'll do in your organization, but in a bit different way. Like you'll use the existing resources and you'll not refer to a GitHub URL. You'll probably refer to let's say the internal storage account URL and pass the SAS token out here. So this is how you can go ahead and let's say also make an installation to, also basically go ahead and install the web server, the IIS also on top of your virtual machines. So guys, any questions that I can take with this? Anything guys? Now, until and unless you don't practice this, guys, won't be able to get a hands on. So what I'm going to do today is like I'll just save this template to a public GitHub URL and I'll just share the link out to you all so that you can use this out. So I do not have a public GitHub URL as of now, but give me some time. By tomorrow's class, I'll go ahead and share this out. Till that point, you can refer to this video and start building your own template out here. And this is very very important to do, guys, because this is something which is just going to be your bread and butter, because this is something that you'll probably be working on a daily basis depending upon the project that you're into, and this will really be a very good value addition to your career, guys. Any of the automation tool, because by default DevOps is the job of DevOps is like to uh, ease off whatever is getting created manually. You're trying to get automate the things out. So for automation, you'll either be using let's say Terraform or let's say PowerShell or ARM templates, something like that. So guys, any questions regarding anything? And this will take some time, guys. Like this installation will take some time. Now it's done, and now if I probably go ahead and give it a shot, it'll give me an IIS script out here. So this is how it kind of works out. So you can basically go ahead and install any kind of PowerShell basically using the custom script extension out here. So this is how the entire deployment is kind of going on right now. And I've like created a lot of resources. I want to delete it. So this is a good opportunity to show me, let's say, to show you all, let's say, how I can basically use complete deployments out here. So I've created a lot of resources. Now I don't want all these resources because they are eating up a lot of cost. So I'll say, okay, fine, great. I want to delete everything. So I'll just create a new template out here. I'll basically take out functions. I don't need functions. I don't need outputs. I don't even need resources because I want to delete all the resources out there. I'll say this is a blank template. I'll save it as a JSON file. I'll use my same PowerShell script. I'll say this is destruction, something like this. Same thing. Now I'll say my template is blank template.json. Mode is complete. And I'll switch on my debug. As in when I do this, it says, you know what, yes, I am good. I say yes. Now it says, you know what, are you sure that you're using a complete deployment mode? This will, kind of destroy everything that is not there as a part of this template. I'll say yes, I want to do it. I'm pretty sure about it. And now it's going to do ahead and see, it's first validating the template. There is nothing inside this template. There's a blank template out here. And I'm just taking this template and putting it on top of my resource group. So it will erase everything. So even the deletion process is something that I'm automating out. I'm not even going to the portal and I'm not even interacting with any of the resources. And now I have a destruction deployment that is going around, which will not deploy anything, but rather which will destroy everything. It will now start deleting each and every resource, identifying each and every resource. It will understand what is the dependency infrastructure of the resource and it'll start deleting the parent and then the child resources in that way. And it'll target each and everything. It'll first target the child and then it'll target the parent resource as such. So after like 5 or 6 minutes, it's gonna take like about 5 or 6 minutes even if you go ahead and delete from the portal. So after like 5 or 6 minutes, it'll go ahead and let's say delete everything out. Like it's just going to go ahead and delete everything out because this is a blank template. I'm not deploying anything out here. Rather, I'm deleting everything. So this is how I can use this particular blank template in order to go ahead and destroy all my resources if I don't want it. In this case, yes, I don't want it. And after a couple of refreshes, you'll see these resources getting destroyed. So guys, any questions with this?
So we are deleting the entire resource or resource group totally?
The entire resources inside the resource group. I'm not deleting the resource group as such. It will delete the resources inside a resource group because the scope of ARM templates is inside a resource group and not on a resource group. So right now it also went ahead and deleted my virtual machine, which was the basic child resource. And after a couple of minutes, it'll go ahead and delete everything out. So any further questions with this, guys? And guys, this is like very important. Like I cannot emphasize the importance of ARM templates and PowerShell scripts. So as I mean, I would suggest get as much as practice as you can, like as much as practice as you can out here, because this becomes like quite very important for for everyone to like practice this out and do a lot of stuff. So it requires certainly a lot of practice, but there's a lot of documentation available out there, and I'll definitely be able to help you all out in every step that you take in the ARM templates. Please make sure that you're practicing it. Please make sure that you're leveraging the resources that you have, because all this, like when even I learned it, I did not have any resources. I just went ahead, looked into documentations, made a lot of errors while learning this out, and that's how I kind of learned. So I believe the errors that you get are like very big stepping stones for your learning curve. So please go ahead, make a lot of errors that you can. When you're practicing it, no one is going to tell you that you're making an error and all that stuff, right? So make as much as errors that you can, wrote down the errors, learn from the errors, and that's how basically you can, kind of master this out. So if there are no further questions, guys, I'm good to close the session and we can meet tomorrow and we can start platform as a service from tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.